Looking back, it's almost laughable how blind I was. For years, I thought Judy and I had a rock-solid marriage. I played the role of the supportive husband while she chased her career, traveling frequently for business trips. It never crossed my mind to doubt her. That illusion started to crumble on an ordinary Tuesday evening. I was at a coffee shop, catching up on emails, when one of Judy's colleagues, Sophia, approached me. I'd met her briefly at a work event, but she looked different now. Anxious, almost guilty. She handed me a manila envelope without much explanation, only saying it was about Judy and her boss, Ryan. She seemed nervous, her gaze flitting around as though someone might be watching. I hesitated to open it. For a moment, I convinced myself it couldn't be anything serious. Judy wasn't perfect, but she was loyal. Or so I thought. The envelope sat on the table like a ticking bomb, daring me to confront whatever truth it held. When I finally opened it, my chest tightened. The photos inside told a story I wasn't prepared to face. Grainy, candid shots of Judy and Ryan revealed a side of her I didn't recognize. In one, she was laughing, leaning in too close to him, his hand casually resting on her lower back. In another, they were at a bar, their body language intimate in a way that left little to the imagination. Then there was the one that shattered everything. A kiss, unmistakable and damning, with his hand firmly placed on her thigh. My pulse pounded as I stared at the images, each one a betrayal that felt like a knife to the gut. All the years of trust, all the shared moments, now felt like a cruel joke. Sitting there, I couldn't process it all at once. First came disbelief, a desperate hope that there was some innocent explanation. Then anger surged, a deep, burning rage that threatened to consume me. But I wasn't the type to react impulsively. I knew I had to stay calm, to think. Who else knew? How long had this been going on? And most importantly, how was I going to handle it? I left the coffee shop in a daze, clutching the envelope as if it were some fragile artifact. The photos replayed in my mind like a haunting slideshow, each one stoking the fire of betrayal. By the time I reached home, I had managed to suppress my anger, locking it away somewhere deep inside me. I couldn't afford to lose control. Not yet. Judy wasn't home when I arrived, which was hardly unusual. She was at work, probably staying late to finalize some reports. Those phrases, once so mundane, now felt loaded with deceit. I wondered if she was actually at the office or if she was with him. The house was eerily quiet, and for the first time in years, it felt foreign to me. I moved through the rooms, my mind racing, but my face calm. There were no signs of anything amiss. No lingering cologne that wasn't mine, no misplaced items hinting at her indiscretions. Judy was thorough, I'd give her that. I went to our shared office and sat at the desk, staring at the family photo on the shelf. We looked so happy in it, me, her, and the life we'd built together. The thought made my stomach churn. It felt like staring at a mirage, something beautiful that had never really existed. I didn't open the envelope again that night. I couldn't bear to see the evidence a second time. Instead, I spent hours retracing every trip she'd taken, every unexplained late night, every time she'd brushed off my questions with a casual smile. I was searching for cracks in the foundation, moments where I should have noticed but didn't. The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the way she had carried on as though everything was fine. The casual lies, the affectionate texts she still sent me when she was away, the way she kissed me goodbye before each trip. It was all a performance, and I had been the oblivious audience. When Judy finally came home late that night, she greeted me like nothing was wrong. She asked about my day, kissed my cheek, and headed upstairs to shower. I forced myself to act normal, even though my chest tightened with every word she said. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I decided to gather more information. I wasn't going to charge into this blindly. If Judy had spent months lying to me, I could spend a few days playing the part of the oblivious husband. As I lay in bed that night, listening to her steady breathing beside me, I began to form a plan. She had built this lie carefully, but no structure, no matter how solid it seemed, could stand forever. The next morning, Judy was as cheerful as ever, humming softly as she prepared for another busy day at the office. I watched her from the kitchen table, my coffee growing cold in my hands. The betrayal felt sharper in the daylight, but I kept my expression neutral. She kissed me goodbye, her lips warm and familiar, but all I could think about was the lies hiding behind her smile. Once she was gone, I sprang into action. I wasn't just going to sit around and wonder. I needed answers, solid proof. The photos in the envelope were enough to confirm my suspicions, but I wanted the whole story. I started with her emails. As the one who managed our household accounts, I had access to her login details. It didn't take long to find a hidden email account she rarely used, likely the one she thought I'd never bother checking. What I found there made my stomach twist. Messages to and from Ryan filled the inbox. Most were casual, work-related on the surface, but a few crossed the line. There were hints of inside jokes, veiled references to personal meetings, and one message that struck like a hammer. Last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about you. I closed the laptop and sat back, letting the anger simmer instead of boil over. It was one thing to suspect an affair, but seeing the words made it real in a way I hadn't anticipated. The emails were a start, but I needed more. That afternoon, I purchased a set of voice-activated recorders and a GPS tracker. If Judy was going to lie to my face, I would find out exactly where she was going and what she was doing. I placed the tracker discreetly under the driver's seat of her car and set one of the recorders near the kitchen phone, another in the bedroom. I hated how sneaky it all felt, but she had already rewritten the rules of our marriage. I was just playing by them now. Over the next few days, I monitored her behavior closely. She didn't seem suspicious, which meant my precautions were working. At night, she talked about her day as if nothing had changed while I nodded and played along. It was exhausting, pretending everything was fine when my world had been turned upside down. By the end of the week, I had enough recordings and GPS data to paint a clearer picture. The GPS log showed multiple trips to places that weren't her office, restaurants, a boutique hotel, even Ryan's home address. The voice recordings were less direct, but just as damning. Phone conversations where she brushed off questions from friends about late nights, or worse, conversations I couldn't hear because she'd moved out of range to take a call. The pieces were falling into place, and with each discovery, my anger gave way to something colder and more focused. This wasn't just about the affair anymore. Judy's deceit wasn't going to destroy me. It was going to destroy her. The turning point came on a Saturday afternoon. Judy was out, claiming she had a meeting with a client to finalize important contracts. I already knew better. Her GPS tracker told a different story. Her car was parked at a boutique hotel across town. I spent hours pacing the house, torn between storming over there and staying calm. But I knew better than to act impulsively. If I confronted her now, she'd lie her way out of it, just as she'd been doing for months. I needed undeniable proof, something she couldn't twist or deny. Later that night, as she returned home, I watched her closely. She walked in wearing the same careful smile she always used, kissed me on the cheek, and started talking about her productive day. Her hair was freshly styled, and her makeup was perfect. Too perfect for someone who'd supposedly spent hours in a dull meeting. She sat down to have dinner with me, chatting about a colleague's upcoming birthday party, all while I tried to keep my face neutral. It felt surreal, sitting across from her, listening to her recount the events of a day I knew she hadn't actually had. After dinner, she excused herself to take a shower. That was my chance. While she was upstairs, I retrieved the audio recorder I'd hidden in her car earlier that week. With trembling hands, I plugged it into my laptop and played the most recent files. Her voice came through first, slightly muffled, but unmistakable. She was laughing, her tone lighter and flirtier than I'd heard in years. Another voice followed, Ryan's. I clenched my fists as I listened to the exchange. They spoke about the time they'd spent together earlier in the day. Ryan made a suggestive comment, and Judy laughed, telling him not to get carried away. There was a rustling sound, followed by a low murmur I couldn't quite make out. My stomach churned as I imagined what that sound could be. Hearing her voice like that, full of excitement and playfulness, hurt more than I expected. It was a side of her I hadn't seen in years, one she reserved for him. When she came back downstairs, towel drying her hair, I forced myself to act normal. I made small talk, asking about her plans for the coming week. She answered without hesitation, spinning yet another web of lies about work obligations and client meetings. That night, as she slept soundly beside me, I stared at the ceiling, replaying the recording in my mind. This was no longer about suspicion or doubt. I had confirmation. Judy was unfaithful, and she wasn't just betraying me. She was mocking everything we'd built together. The following week, Judy's lies began to unravel. Not because she slipped up, but because I was starting to see through every word she said. Her stories, once so convincing, now sounded rehearsed, like a script she had perfected over time. She mentioned an upcoming business trip, casually dropping it into conversation over breakfast. Just a quick overnight trip to finalize things with a client, she said, pouring herself another cup of coffee. I nodded, feigning indifference, but but my mind was already racing. I checked the GPS tracker on her car later that day. It confirmed my suspicions. The trip was a cover. She wasn't going to any client meeting. She was headed to a luxury hotel in the city. I recognized the address. It was one she had visited before, and Ryan's car had been parked there too. The voice recorders yielded more clues. A brief conversation she had in her car confirmed the nature of her trip. She called Ryan, telling him to book the suite with the same view as last time. Her tone was light, almost excited, as she talked about the plans they had made. By now, I had a growing arsenal of evidence, emails, GPS logs, audio recordings, and it was getting harder to hide my emotions around her. Every time she spoke to me, every time she smiled, it felt like a slap in the face. Judy started to notice something was off. One evening, she asked me if everything was okay. "You've been quiet lately," she said, tilting her head as though she actually cared. I shrugged it off, telling her work had been stressful. She accepted the excuse without pressing further, but her concern felt hollow. As her business trip approached, she began to overcompensate, showering me with affection that felt calculated rather than genuine. She cooked my favorite meals, left little notes on the fridge, and even suggested we go out for a date night. I went along with it, not because I wanted to, but because it gave me more time to plan. I needed to bide my time until the trip. That was when I would gather the final piece of evidence, the one thing that would ensure she couldn't talk her way out of this. When the day of her trip finally arrived, Judy packed her bags with a practiced ease. She kissed me goodbye, her smile as bright as ever, and promised to call when she got to the hotel. As I watched her car pull out of the driveway, I didn't feel sadness or anger, just a cold, steely determination. This wasn't just about her betrayal anymore. It was about exposing the lies, about showing her that I wasn't the fool she thought I was. Judy's departure marked the beginning of a pivotal weekend. As her car disappeared down the street, I set my plan into motion. I knew exactly where she was going and who would be there waiting for her. This time, I wasn't just going to sit back and collect evidence. I was going to see it for myself. I waited a few hours, giving her enough time to get settled, before I headed to the boutique hotel. Parking a few blocks away, I approached the building cautiously, blending in with the steady stream of guests coming and going. The lobby was polished and inviting, the kind of place people went to escape their ordinary lives. I didn't approach the front desk. Instead, I lingered near the elevators, scanning the guest list on a nearby podium. Sure enough, I spotted Ryan's name, right alongside hers. They had checked into a suite on the top floor. Taking the service stairs, I made my way up, my heart pounding with every step. I wasn't sure what I expected to find, but I knew I needed to be discreet. As I reached their floor, I slowed my pace, listening for any sign of movement. I saw a housekeeping cart parked near the suite. The cleaner was nowhere in sight, likely attending to another room. Acting quickly, I grabbed a tray of untouched towels from the cart and approached their door, posing as staff. From inside, I could hear muffled laughter, Judy's unmistakable voice, light and carefree. It made my stomach churn. I knocked gently, just enough to startle them, and then stepped back out of sight. The door opened slightly, and Ryan peeked out, scanning the hallway. His expression turned relaxed when he saw no one, and he shut the door again. I didn't linger. This was all the confirmation I needed for now. Returning to the lobby, I slipped out unnoticed and headed home, the encounter replaying in my mind. Back at the house, I pulled up the footage from the hidden camera I had placed in Judy's car before she left. It confirmed what I had heard in the hallway. Her conversation with Ryan during the drive was casual and intimate, filled with plans for their evening together. She spoke about their usual spot in the suite and how she'd cleared her schedule to stay longer if needed. It wasn't just the words that stung. It was the ease with which she said them, as though betraying me had become second nature. Later that night, as I sat alone in the quiet house, I decided that this was the last straw. I wasn't just going to expose Judy to myself. I was going to expose her to everyone who mattered in her life. Returning from the hotel, I couldn't shake the image of Ryan's smug face and the sound of Judy's laughter from behind that door. It was as if I didn't exist to her, as if everything we had built over the years was meaningless. But her arrogance, her belief that she could continue this charade without consequences, gave me the edge I needed. The next day, I began laying the groundwork for what would come next. This wasn't just about catching her in the act. It was about making sure her lies couldn't survive the truth. I started by reaching out to someone who had more to lose from this affair than I did. Ryan's wife, Valerie. I didn't know her personally, but a little digging online revealed enough. She was well connected in the local charity circuit, frequently attending galas with Ryan. From what I gathered, she was well aware of his wandering eye, but this time, I suspected she would want proof. I sent her an anonymous email, attaching one of the incriminating photos I'd been given along with a note. You deserve to know the truth. Check this hotel. Address. He'll be there again tonight. Then I set my sights on Judy's professional life. If she wanted to play this game under the guise of business trips and client meetings, I figured it was time to involve her colleagues. Using the recordings I had gathered, I compiled a series of audio files where she openly discussed her affair with Ryan. I planned to release them strategically to the right people, just enough to sow doubt about her professionalism without exposing everything at once. Finally, I prepared for Judy's return. I couldn't afford to let her sense that anything was wrong. The facade of a trusting husband had to hold for just a little longer. I cleaned the house, made her favorite dinner, and even left a bouquet of flowers on the kitchen counter. If she thought I was oblivious, she'd be less cautious, and that was exactly what I needed. By the time she walked through the door that evening, I had perfected my act. She greeted me with a smile, setting her bag down casually, as though she hadn't just spent the night betraying me. You didn't have to go through all this trouble, she said, gesturing to the flowers and dinner. I shrugged, playing it off. Just wanted to do something nice. She sat down at the table, launching into a rehearsed story about how productive her trip had been and how exhausted she was from all the client meetings. Her words were smooth, practiced, and utterly false. I listened quietly, nodding in all the right places, even as my mind replayed the recordings I'd heard earlier that day. With every lie she told, my resolve hardened. She had no idea that the trap was already set, that every step she took now was leading her closer to the edge. The day after Judy's return, I sent out the first piece of evidence. It was subtle, an anonymous email to one of her coworkers, a junior associate who worked closely with Ryan. The email contained a single audio clip of Judy laughing with Ryan about how easy it was to sneak away during work hours. The coworker didn't reply, but I didn't need them to. Word spreads fast in an office, especially when it's about the boss. By mid-afternoon, Judy's phone began lighting up with messages, which she checked furtively while pretending not to notice me. She grew noticeably tense during dinner that evening, her usual smooth demeanor cracking slightly. Work's been a little stressful, she admitted, swirling her wine glass. Some gossip going around the office. You know how it is? I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. Inside, I felt the first flicker of satisfaction. She had no idea where the gossip had started, but it was clear she was feeling the pressure. Over the next few days, I continued to drop breadcrumbs. A copy of one of her incriminating emails mysteriously made its way to Valerie, Ryan's wife, along with a few select photos. I didn't include a note this time. The images spoke for themselves. I knew when Valerie received them because it didn't take long for her to act. She confronted Ryan at his office, and the fallout was immediate. Word of their argument leaked out, spreading like wildfire through the company. That evening, Judy came home looking pale and distracted. She barely touched her dinner, her usual bubbly conversation replaced with curt answers and forced smiles. Just a tough day at work, she said when I asked if everything was all right. I watched her closely, noting how she clutched her phone like a lifeline. She spent most of the night texting, her expression growing darker with every reply. The next morning, she left the house earlier than usual, claiming she needed to get ahead of some deadlines. I waited until she was gone before checking the hidden camera I had planted in her car. The audio confirmed what I already suspected. She was panicking. I don't know what's going on, she told Ryan during a phone call. Her voice was sharp, almost accusatory. Someone's trying to set us up. Valerie knows. People at work are starting to talk. Ryan, for his part, tried to calm her down, but there was an edge of irritation in his tone. Just lay low, he said. We'll figure it out. I couldn't help but smirk as I listened. The cracks in their little scheme were widening, and soon, the whole structure would collapse. By the end of the week, Judy was unraveling. She tried to keep up her polished exterior at home, but the strain was evident. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, and she spent more time working late or disappearing into her home office to take urgent calls. One night, I overheard her arguing with Ryan on the phone. Her voice was hushed, but the anger was unmistakable. She accused him of being careless, of not handling the situation at work, and of letting everything spiral out of control. Ryan fired back, blaming her for drawing attention to them with her recklessness. Listening from the hallway, I couldn't help but marvel at how quickly their so-called partnership was crumbling. The pressure was working, and they were turning on each other. The next day, I sent out another round of evidence. This time, it went directly to Ryan's superiors on the company's board. I attached several damning emails and audio clips, carefully selecting pieces that exposed not just the affair, but also Ryan's misuse of company resources. The fallout was swift. By noon, Ryan was called into a closed-door meeting with the board, and by the afternoon, rumors of his suspension began circulating. Judy must have heard about it because she came home earlier than usual, her face tight with worry. She barely acknowledged me as she walked through the door, heading straight to her laptop. I stayed in the living room, pretending to watch TV, but I could hear her typing furiously, likely trying to do damage control. Later that evening, she tried to gauge my mood. "Work's been chaotic," she said, sitting beside me on the couch. "Big changes happening. Ryan might step back for a while." Her tone was casual, but I caught the way her hands fidgeted with the edge of her sleeve. "Really? That's surprising," I said, feigning interest. "I thought things were going well at your office." "They were," she said quickly, too quickly. "It's just corporate politics. You know how it is?" I nodded, keeping my face neutral. But inside, I was reveling in her discomfort. She was scrambling, and the cracks in her web of lies were growing wider by the hour. By the weekend, the situation at her office had reached a boiling point. Ryan's suspension was made official, and several other employees were being questioned about their knowledge of his misconduct. Judy, despite her attempts to keep a low profile, was dragged into the chaos. That Sunday, she sat at the kitchen table with her head in her hands, staring blankly at her coffee cup. "This week has been a nightmare," she muttered when I asked if she was all right. "It feels like everything is falling apart." I sat across from her, hiding my satisfaction behind a look of concern. "I'm sure it'll all work out," I said, my voice steady and reassuring. She didn't reply, but I could see the doubt flicker across her face. For the first time, she looked uncertain, as though she was starting to realize she was losing control. As Judy struggled to keep her lies intact, Valerie decided to escalate her own retaliation against Ryan. I hadn't contacted her again, but the trail of breadcrumbs I'd left was enough for her to act decisively. Early Monday morning, while Judy was still at home pacing the kitchen, her phone buzzed with a text. She read it quickly, and her face turned pale. "I have to go into the office earlier than planned," she said, grabbing her coat and bag. I nodded, watching her rush out the door, her usual composure now a distant memory. As soon as she left, I checked the GPS tracker on her car. It wasn't heading toward her office, but to Valerie's address instead. Valerie had apparently decided it was time to confront Judy directly. Through the camera footage later that day, I would watch Judy and Valerie face off in the driveway. Valerie stood with her arms crossed, holding a stack of papers, likely the damning photos and emails. Judy, for once, looked cornered. The argument that followed was heated but brief. Valerie waved the papers in Judy's face, pointing toward the street as if ordering her to leave. Judy tried to explain, her gestures frantic, but Valerie wasn't having any of it. She threw the papers on the ground and turned her back, marching into the house and slamming the door. Judy lingered in the driveway for a moment, clearly shaken. She picked up the papers, shoved them into her bag, and drove away. When she came home that evening, she was unusually quiet. Gone was the false cheer she had managed to maintain for weeks. Instead, she seemed distracted, lost in her thoughts. "Long day?" I asked casually, setting down my book. She nodded, barely looking at me. "Work is complicated right now. A lot of things happening at once." I didn't press her, but I knew she was rattled. Valerie's confrontation had shaken her confidence, and now she was scrambling to figure out her next move. Over the next few days, Judy became increasingly erratic. She was constantly on her phone, taking calls in hushed tones and texting at all hours. Once, I caught her pacing the living room, muttering to herself about how none of this was supposed to happen. Her relationship with Ryan seemed to be fracturing, too. The audio recordings from her car revealed tense conversations where they argued about how to handle the growing fallout. Ryan sounded more desperate with each call, while Judy's frustration bubbled over into thinly veiled accusations. "You promised me this wouldn't get out," she hissed during one call. "Now my career is on the line, and you're just sitting there doing nothing." Ryan's response was curt. "What do you want me to do, Judy? I'm already out of the company. You're the one still pretending everything's fine." It was clear their partnership was crumbling, and they were dragging each other down in the process. As Judy's life spiraled further out of control, an unexpected opportunity presented itself. One of Ryan's disgruntled former colleagues, a mid-level manager named Eric, reached out to me anonymously. He'd heard whispers about Judy and Ryan's relationship and was looking for leverage of his own. Eric didn't know my identity, but his email suggested he was after the same thing I was, exposing Ryan's misconduct and those complicit in it. He mentioned having access to Ryan's personal files, including details about corporate misdeeds that went far beyond the affair. After carefully crafting a response, I agreed to meet him. We arranged a discreet meeting at a park outside the city, where we could speak without raising suspicion. Eric was cautious, keeping his distance as he handed over a flash drive containing what he claimed was everything I need to burn Ryan to the ground. He didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer explanations. The less we knew about each other, the better. When I returned home, I immediately reviewed the files. What I found was far worse than I had imagined. Ryan's financial misconduct was extensive, involving embezzlement, fraud, and even the misuse of company funds to finance his private escapades, including his time with Judy. The file also contained a spreadsheet that detailed expenses for their outings, including hotel stays, dinners, and flights. Judy's name appeared more times than I could count. The arrogance of it all, the audacity to treat their affair like a business expense, made my blood boil. Armed with this new evidence, I decided it was time to escalate. That evening, I sent an email to a journalist known for her hard-hitting investigations into corporate corruption. Along with the files from Eric, I included my own evidence, emails, audio recordings, and the incriminating photos of Judy and Ryan. The response was almost immediate. The journalist thanked me for the tip and promised to verify everything before running the story. I could tell she was excited. This wasn't just a scandal. It was a corporate implosion waiting to happen. Meanwhile, Judy was oblivious to the storm brewing around her. She spent most of her time at home locked in her office, frantically making calls and trying to salvage what little control she had left. Her desperation was palpable, and it was only a matter of time before the truth came crashing down. I waited patiently, knowing the next move wasn't mine to make. The story would break soon, and when it did, Judy and Ryan wouldn't just lose their reputations. They'd lose everything. The expose hit like a bombshell. Early Monday morning, the journalist published a scathing article titled "Corporate Scandal: CEO and Executive Caught in a Web of Corruption and Deceit." The story detailed Ryan's embezzlement, his misuse of company funds, and of course, the affair with Judy. It included damning evidence, emails, financial records, and the photos of them together at the boutique hotel. By mid-morning, it was all anyone could talk about. The media picked up the story, and social media was flooded with outrage. The company's board released a statement announcing an emergency investigation into Ryan's actions and suspending Judy from her position pending further review. At home, Judy was a wreck. She paced the living room, her phone glued to her ear as she tried to contain the fallout. Her calls were frantic, her voice sharp and panicked. "I don't know how this got out," she said at one point, though I could hear the desperation in her tone. "This isn't just about me. It's taking everyone down." Ryan, it seemed, had gone radio silent. The last audio file from her car confirmed that he had stopped responding to her calls. "He's throwing me under the bus," she muttered bitterly, not realizing I could hear her from the next room. By the evening, the weight of the scandal had fully settled on her shoulders. She sat at the dining table, staring at the television as yet another news segment covered the story. Her hands trembled as she reached for her glass of wine. "I don't know how this happened," she said almost to herself. I stayed quiet, letting her unravel. Part of me wanted to confront her right then, to lay everything on the table and watch her squirm. But I knew it wasn't time yet. She wasn't ready to face the truth, and I wanted her to feel every moment of the chaos she had created. As the days passed, the fallout continued. Judy received an official letter from the company informing her that her suspension was now indefinite, pending the outcome of the investigation. Ryan, meanwhile, had gone into hiding, his once powerful reputation reduced to ashes. The scandal had consumed them both, but I knew this was only the beginning. For Judy, the public disgrace was one thing, but the personal consequences, the ones I had planned so carefully, were still to come. The night I chose to confront Judy was eerily quiet. She had spent the day making frantic phone calls and sending emails, trying to salvage what little remained of her professional life. By the time she came downstairs for dinner, she looked exhausted, her hair disheveled, her face pale, and her usual confident demeanor completely shattered. I had been waiting for this moment, carefully rehearsing what I would say. But as I watched her sit across from me, picking at the plate of food I had prepared, the weight of what she had done hit me all over again. "You've been under a lot of stress lately," I said, breaking the silence. She looked up sharply, her eyes narrowing as if trying to gauge whether there was a hidden meaning in my words. "You could say that," she replied cautiously. It's been overwhelming. I nodded, leaning back in my chair. I can't imagine how hard it must be, juggling everything. The meetings, the travel, the affair with Ryan. Her fork clattered against the plate, her face draining of color. For a moment, she was completely silent, her eyes wide with shock. "What are you talking about?" she finally stammered, her voice unsteady. I reached into the drawer beside me and pulled out the envelope Sophia had given me, the one filled with photos of her and Ryan. I tossed it onto the table, watching as her trembling hands picked it up. She flipped through the pictures, her expression shifting from disbelief to panic. "Where did you get these?" she demanded, her voice rising. "That doesn't matter," I said, keeping my tone calm. "What matters is that I know. I've known for weeks, Judy. I know about the hotel rooms, the emails, the phone calls. I know everything." She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Her hands clutched the edge of the table, her knuckles white. Finally, she managed to say, "It's not what it looks like." I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "Really? Because it looks like you've been lying to me for months, maybe longer. It looks like you've been sneaking around behind my back, throwing away everything we built together for." "What a fling!" Her defensiveness flared. "It wasn't just a fling," she snapped. "You don't understand. Ryan and we—" She trailed off, realizing she was only digging herself deeper. "I don't care what you tell yourself to justify it," I interrupted. "The fact is, you betrayed me. You lied to me every single day while you were with him." She stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "You don't know what it's like, Benjamin," she said, her voice breaking. "You don't know what it's like to feel unappreciated, to feel invisible." "Invisible?" I repeated, my anger rising. "I've supported you through everything, Judy. I've been here, holding this family together while you chased your career. And this is how you repay me?" Her shoulders slumped, and for the first time, she looked defeated. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered. "But it did," I said firmly. "And now you have to face the consequences." She didn't reply, sinking back into her chair, her face buried in her hands. I stood up, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. "This marriage is over, Judy. I'll be filing for divorce first thing in the morning." She looked up, her eyes pleading. "Benjamin, wait." But I didn't wait. I walked out of the room, leaving her alone with the weight of her lies and the evidence of her betrayal. The morning after the confrontation, I didn't wait for Judy to try and plead her case again. I left the house early, heading straight to my lawyer's office. By now, I had gathered enough evidence to ensure the divorce proceedings would be swift and decisive. My lawyer, a sharp and meticulous professional, reviewed the folder of emails, photos, and recordings I had provided. She nodded approvingly, her tone calm but firm. "This is more than enough to establish grounds for divorce. And with the media scandal already in play, your position is solid. We'll move forward immediately." I left her office feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. The battle wasn't over, but I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my life. When I returned home later that day, Judy was waiting for me. She sat in the living room, looking small and fragile in a way I'd never seen before. Gone was the confident, ambitious woman I had married. In her place was someone desperate and broken. "We need to talk," she said quietly as I stepped inside. "There's nothing left to talk about," I replied, setting my keys on the counter. "Please, Benjamin," she said, her voice cracking. "I know I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but can we try to fix this? For us, for everything we've been through." I turned to face her, my anger tempered by exhaustion. "Fix what, Judy? The lies? The betrayal? You didn't just break my trust, you shattered it. There's no coming back from that." She started to cry, but it didn't move me the way it once might have. Her tears felt like another tactic, a way to manipulate the situation in her favor. "You have to understand," she said between sobs. "I never meant to hurt you. I didn't think it would go this far." "That's the problem, Judy," I said, my voice steady. "You didn't think. You didn't care about what this would do to me, to us. You only cared about yourself." Her sobs quieted, and she stared at me, her face streaked with tears. "What happens now?" "I've already filed for divorce," I said bluntly. "You'll be hearing from my lawyers soon. And as for the house, I'll be staying until the paperwork is finalized. After that, you can do whatever you want." She flinched at my words, as though the finality of them had just sunk in. For a moment, she looked like she wanted to argue, but then she simply nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. The rest of the day passed in tense silence. She stayed in her room, likely calling whoever she thought might offer her support. I spent the evening making plans for my next steps, focusing on rebuilding the life she had tried to destroy. The first domino had fallen, and there was no stopping the chain reaction that followed. The days that followed were a blur of legal meetings and quiet tension at home. Judy and I barely spoke, the weight of everything that had happened creating an insurmountable wall between us. She tried a few more times to reach out, to apologize, but her words meant nothing now. The media frenzy around Ryan continued to grow, and Judy was swept up in it by association. Her suspension became a formal termination, the company eager to distance itself from the scandal. The final blow came when Ryan was officially charged with fraud and embezzlement. Judy's name wasn't mentioned in the legal proceedings, but her reputation was already ruined. One afternoon, I came home to find her packing her belongings. Suitcases were lined up in the hallway, and she moved around the house with a defeated air, her usual grace replaced by hesitation. "I'll leave by the end of the week," she said quietly when she noticed me. I nodded, not trusting myself to say anything. Watching her pack up the life we'd built together didn't bring me the satisfaction I thought it might. Instead, it felt like the final chapter of a book I no longer wanted to read. The day she moved out, I didn't help her load the car. I stood on the porch, watching as she carried the last of her things to the trunk. She paused before getting into the driver's seat, looking back at me with tear-filled eyes. "I'm sorry, Benjamin," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. After she drove away, I stood there for a long time, letting the silence of the empty house settle around me. It was strange, the absence of her presence, but it felt like the first breath of fresh air after being suffocated for months. In the weeks that followed, I began to rebuild. The divorce finalized quickly, thanks to the mountain of evidence in my favor. I kept the house and most of our shared assets, leaving Judy to start over with what little she had left. The people I had helped expose, Ryan rallied behind me. Together, we started a new venture, one built on transparency and ethics. Everything Ryan's empire had pretended to stand for but never did. Life didn't return to normal overnight, but I found a new rhythm. The betrayal still stung, but it no longer defined me. Slowly, I began to feel like myself again, free from the lies and deceit that had clouded my life for so long. As for Judy, I heard through mutual acquaintances that she moved to another city, trying to piece together what remained of her career. I didn't care to know more. She was part of my past. A chapter one had finally closed. Standing in my now quiet home one evening, I realized that I didn't need revenge or vindication to feel at peace. Justice had already been served, and I had found something far more valuable: the strength to move on.